Well, as Vermont Public's own Walter Parker rings in the noon hour, I do welcome our friends to Green Mountain Challenge. I'm Sam Liss, your host. We are not coming live today, but we still welcome audience participation. Everyone had a chance to submit questions apropos to our theme. If we did receive questions, I would have selected a few to read on the air, and those whose questions we did select would be eligible for nice prizes so generously offered by friends of the show. Maestro Ariel Rudiakov, for example, and Paul Michael Brinker of the Dorset Players. Now, on to another first for Green Mountain Challenge. Another very special show. Today's show features a remote feed from, I'm not exaggerating, from Hollywood. And my guest, whom I'm lucky to call a friend at this point, is Tom Roach, a longtime Chief of Information Technology, CIO of Warner Brothers mostly, but also 20th Century Fox Studios. Over 30 years, actually, including contracting work. In addition, Tom has been a prominent, influential, and successful advocate for people along the autism spectrum and for neurodiversity in general in the workplace. He's played a major role in the expansion and modernization of the film industry, including the conversion or transition from celluloid film to digital. Incredibly modest, and he'll probably contradict me today, I'm kidding. Incredibly modest, Tom has put his stamp on so many aspects of the present-day film industry. And we're going to explain the pun, but first I want to do a very bad impression of Gary Owens. So I apologize to the late Gary Owens. From beautiful downtown Burbank is Rowan and Laugh-In's Martin. Actually, it's not. It's Tom Roach. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you for having me, Sam.
Do you want to explain the pun about putting your stamp on the film business?
Yeah, I'm a avid stamp collector, stamp dealer, and that's how I know Sam. And so now in retirement, I do that as sort of a hobby slash business, but have been able to really pick it back up and get into it after my retirement from Warner Brothers.
I see. So, Tom, you're obviously here for a couple of reasons. But first, can you give us a brief glimpse into your background? For example, how did you get started in the business? Sort of amazing, because I know, but other people don't. And how did you work your way to the top? And just as a little sidelight, a little bit about your father and his work with the original Disneyland.
Yeah, I went to college, and my emphasis was chemical engineering and geology. But I was dating my high school sweetheart at the time, and looking to marry her. And it became obvious that she wasn't going to relocate to Billings, Montana, or Brazil to help me pursue my mining career and my career in geology and chemical engineering. So I saw an ad in the newspaper or online, I guess at that point, was for a computer technician at Warner Brothers Studio. And just from my dad's experience with the theme parks in the studio, I used to go to his shop, and he was a plastics engineer, and he used to develop some of the props and some of the ride attractions at Disney and both the studios and the theme park. And I was very fond. He used to take me into the studio when he could and take me into his shop where he was building the actual props. And I jumped at the opportunity once I saw the ad. And that's how I applied for the job. I interviewed, and they offered it to me, and I took it. And that was my start repairing personal computers and typewriters at Warner Brothers Studios back in the day. And I think they only had 6 computers at the time, and all the rest were IBM Selectra typewriters. So
Yes,
start off at the very beginning of the personal computing phase.
quite a
Back,
change. Yeah.
yeah, 1987, I believe, 85, excuse me.
And obviously, you moved into management, and you worked your way to the top.
Yeah, I did every job as sort of the, I guess mailroom story, but in the technology sense is, I was sort of dismissed. I was put in my own little area, which was a great start. The traditional mainframe IT group sort of didn't believe that these personal computers were going to be anything, and they put me out in this old dilapidated building on the lot, which was turned out to be a building they called Termite Terrace. And Termite Terrace was the animation offices for all of the classic Looney Tunes at the time.
Sure.
And I couldn't figure out at first why every room had a gigantic sunlight, or a open ceiling to it with glass, and it was to get the natural light in there. So the animators back in the days, you think of Chuck Jones and Mel Blanc and those folks,
Absolutely.
working in that area. So I had the privilege of actually working in their space as my first office space.
And just to familiarize our audience who might not know in this day and age, Mel Blanc was the voice of many, if not most, of the Looney Tune characters, Bugs Bunny, Porky Pig, and so forth. And Mel Blanc was also a featured troupe member of the Jack Benny cast. It was Mel Blanc who did many of the stunts with Jack Benny, the man of a thousand voices or more, Mel Blanc. So to move on with that, Tom, could you please highlight the milieu, the environment surrounding your work at the studios? For example, curate some of the anecdotes. You had a Sidney Poitier anecdote. Sidney Poitier's great voice, and in an elevator, there's an anecdote about your office right under and across from the Walton set and other sets. So there's so many other, and an anecdote about Mel Gibson. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I went to work at the studios, and some people say the 40s and 30s and 40s were sort of the heyday of the studios, but I really think it was the 1980s, 1990s. Um, it was a different environment. It was run by creative individuals. It wasn't run by accountants and lawyers. It was run by people that really loved to create beautiful, beautiful product. And, I never was one to be starstruck, but to your earlier mention, I was in an elevator and I got in the elevator without looking and seeing who was behind me. And then I heard the voice and I knew immediately that it was Sidney Poitier. It just that booming, beautiful voice. And that one starstruck me. That one, that I consider, Hollywood royalty. And another one, my wife's, I think her crush slash favorite actor was Mel Gibson back in the Lethal Weapon,
Sure.
all the way up through Maverick. She just thought he was something else. And I used to work with Mel quite a bit because my group, he had an office on the lot, and my group was responsible for setting up all the technology in his office. And so Mel is just the nicest guy in the world back then. I mean, we'd come to his office and he would make us sandwiches. He would, it was a very, very friendly, collaborative environment. And I'd tell my wife, I'd come home and tell her that I worked with Mel Gibson, and that he, rubbed my shoulders and made a sandwich, and, was, joking with me. And I don't think she ever believed me, frankly. I think she thought I was pulling her leg. And
Wives will be wives, does it?
yeah, and we were on the lot one night for a screening, and we walked around a corner, around the sound stages to the screening room, and ran smack dab right face to face with Mel Gibson. And Mel said, "Hey Tom, how you doing?" And my wife stuttered and didn't get a word out for the whole 2 minutes that we were in a conversation with Mel Gibson, and then promptly hit me as we left, saying, "I really did know him," and really, brought to home that I wasn't joking. Um, and it was just this environment where there was no separation. People didn't care that you were a technologist versus an actor versus a writer versus a musician. Everybody just really sort of gathered and brought their sack lunches out in front of the commissaries, and they eat on the picnic tables.
A lot
Uh,
like Clint Eastwood, correct?
yeah, Clint Eastwood would just, his production company, Malpaso, was right across from the commissary, pretty much, and he would just sit out there and have a bag lunch along with everybody else and have conversations with us, and it was a different time. It was a beautiful time to be in the studios,
It is
and
interesting. I mean,
and I
um, and just so people know, your wife's name is Frances, right? And she
correct.
was your high school sweetheart, and you're still together.
Yeah, I think we're on close to 50 years now, so
Interesting.
upwards, yeah, together, 41 years married.
So, and that is a bit of a throwback in a way. But that being said, even in those days, you hear of the Hollywood marriages that weren't really marriages, or the studios arranging for dates for different stars, and so forth, and one spouse after the other. So in a way, your marriage is a throwback, but in a way, it's not, because there weren't that many Hollywood marriages that lasted that long. There was some, but not all that many. Some you wouldn't expect, like Sid Charisse and Tony Martin. You wouldn't have expected that. So there were those stories of marriages that lasted, 50 plus years.
Yeah, I think the, relationship at the studios between their talent and, back in the 30s and 40s, and senior management, Jack Warner or Samuel Goldwyn, whoever it was, it was very contentious. It was very, I think, um, when you talk to, I just lost her name, the woman that was in Mommy Dearest, that was portrayed in Mommy Dearest. But she was Bet Davis.
Oh, Betty
And
Davis, sure.
yeah, Betty Davis, I remember at Warner Brothers in the museum, they had a whole display of all the correspondence that she had with Warner Brothers. And it was, mentioning slave labor and holding to 8 films, and I can't be treated this way. And, it was a different time at the studios, and the time of arranged marriages. And the studios managed the star and owned the star,
Exactly.
and really dictated their whole public and personal life. And that wasn't the case when we were there. It had turned to the point where the actors were pretty much independent and did individual projects for the studios.
So it's interesting in the different phases in Hollywood. You had the original, Louis B. Mayers and Warner Brothers, and then it turned to, from what you're relating, it turned to a different actor type, performer type control, and now it's basically, money manager control, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the, with all the emergence of streaming, and as Disney got involved more, and Warner's got purchased by Time Warner, it became much more of a corporate environment.
Exactly.
It was much more accountants and lawyers,
Exactly.
and then people trying to put together formulas of what was going to be successful at the box office. What formula can we use to make money off a product? And I think I've talked to you about this, Sam. Is back when I was there, I used to sit through these creative meetings where they would go frame by frame over a film, looking to make sure that frame was perfect
Right.
and that the finished product had perfect sound and perfect color, and edited perfectly. And then also sitting in something that you don't see today. Back in the day, I used to be able to sit through and watch the scoring,
Right.
where they have the full orchestra,
Right.
in the sound stage, in the recording stage. and they would, and that quality, I believe, is gone. I mean, I've watched some things on streaming now where you have to have the subtitles on in order to understand because the audio is so bad,
Ah,
and that just that would never happen in the heyday of the studios. It was always, regardless if it was a good product from a script, the presentation of what it was beautiful
well,
and
I
perfect.
I can relate an interesting story. I'm not sure it was Warner Brothers, but during the filming of Casablanca, with Humphrey Bogart and the famous scene where Sam is playing the piano. Um, and of course Sam was played by Dooley Wilson, Arthur Dooley Wilson. Dooley Wilson did sing live at the time. Dooley Wilson could also play the piano, but they didn't want him to because they thought that might distract from the song. So the piano was actually being played in sync. Dooley Wilson was just fingering the piano. The piano was actually being played, what you said, on the sound stage. And what was ironic, it was by another African-American pianist who was out of the sight of camera. And but they arranged it so well in such great sync that we're all familiar with that famous scene, play it again, Sam, which he actually never said. He said, play it, Sam. But it's the same milieu of
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
um,
A
uh,
quick anecdote about Casablanca. One of my jobs at Warner Brothers was to develop all of the technology around film archiving.
interesting.
And when we developed that, our one of our jobs was to go down into the vaults where they keep the film and pull out and inventory everything that Warner's had. And what we found was all of the original footage from Casablanca.
Interesting. Even
And
even the stuff that wound up on the cutting room floor, the rushes.
all of it, and it was, unfortunately, it was on nitrate, which is a very dangerous medium.
Right.
It doesn't do well with moisture and heat, and actually can explode, I mean, catch on fire.
Yes.
So, but we transferred it, and they actually used all that footage to put out the anniversary version of Casablanca with additional footage. So,
That is interesting. I
yeah.
do know when Johnny Carson talked about his early shows, and he wasn't the only one that he did for NBC. Um, a lot of the early debuts of people like Bill Cosby and Flip Wilson were lost because they had all these tapes in the back room, and NBC wanted to make room. They wanted either throw out the tapes to make room for others, or they wanted to write over the tapes. So a lot of the debuts of, whether it be Bill Cosby or anyone, were lost because they destroyed them for one reason or another. But luckily, looks like Warner Brothers saved a lot of the great filmage.
I think they're the leader in film preservation, working with the American Film Institute, and they've really gone out of their way to make sure to preserve the art and the craft
Interesting.
of the historical product.
So before we get to your other very interesting, um, very serious endeavor, let me put it that way, I do want to mention that we do have in our audience the daughter of a longtime actor. He acted for many in many different venues. He was on stage. He was on television. He was the star of the Fu Manchu series in the early 1940s. He had roles. He was Will Geer's stand-in for the Waltons, and he appeared in his own roles 3 times in the Waltons. Um, uh, he was in, again, many shows that maybe not the featured star, but had many different roles. He was actually even recruited once by John Steinbeck, of all people, to play a character in one of John Steinbeck's movies. So if we can, I don't know if Janet has anything to say. I'm going to just introduce Janet Gordon Cook. Her father was originally called Charles Gordon. He changed his name to Glenn Gordon before he entered television. So if Janet, you have a couple of words, and I go, Kate, we'll turn around the camera, but if you have a couple of words just to say about your father and the Waltons, your father being Will Geer stand-in on the Waltons, and Tom's office would look right out at the Walton set, which unfortunately, am I correct, Tom, unfortunately burnt down a few years ago. Someone was
More than a few years, but yeah, it burnt down. Yeah.
someone was smoking, unfortunately.
Yep.
Do you want me to say what?
Yes, please.
when
A little
Dad
bit about your
started?
father and the Waltons. Your father being Will
Okay.
Geer stand-in.
He started in 1973 as a stand-in for his best friend Will Geer. And he continued doing that until his death in 1977 as a stand-in. He also had 3 episodes on the Waltons where he played 3 different professors in 74, 75, and 76.
And he had other prominent parts in other movies. Could you just mention a couple of the movies where he was featured?
Oh, I remember when Elton John came to California, and his favorite program was the Waltons, and he gave every member of the cast a ticket to go see his show. And Will Geer gave me his ticket, so I got to go with all the Walton kids and the adults, because Will had another plan to go to.
Interesting. And
We're a wonderful bunch of people.
yes, and you remember the milieu, the environment that Tom worked in, correct, at Warner Brothers?
Oh, I've been researching for a long time because I was never left any information. And I've been about 20 years I've been searching for the movies, and I've come up with more than, well, around 20 that he did.
Nice.
But he did mostly plays, and that's where he met Will Geer.
I
believe, I'm not positive, that he met him on Tobacco Road,
sure.
but I'm not sure of that.
Any case, so we're lucky enough to have the daughter of a prominent actor in our audience today who wanted to meet Tom Roach. Tom, you have another side to you, another aspect that is exceptionally interesting. And as a former disability advocate, I'm enthralled by it. Along the way, with your work at the studios, you became interested in the talents and skills of people diagnosed along the autism spectrum, and more generally, those who had neurodiverse personalities. And you realized the great potential that they offered in the field of information technology, and more specifically and realistically in the employment opportunities for them. So your interest successfully led to not only token stuff, but vast employment opportunities and productivity, not only for those individuals, but for the industry itself. So how did you become interested in advocating for people along the autism spectrum? And could you say something after that about how this led to advances for everyone?
I started with Francis and I. We were traveling in Europe, and we took my nephew. We went to London, Florence, and Rome, and my nephew was diagnosed with Asperger's, which now has been sort of lumped into high functioning autism as a term. And his emphasis and his passion is around art history. I didn't really realize it until we went to our first gallery, and he would not, he sure he knew all the things like this was painted by so and so and it was at this year, but he can actually go into the specifics of the painting. That this was due to a feud with the Medici family, and he made the head of the Medici family look like a goat or whatever, and he was able to go in and tell you the whole story behind every painting that we saw. And it just amazed me the amount of knowledge that he had and his this passion he had around uh this art history and actually overall history, because we also went to Churchill's bunker and he knew everything about Churchill's bunker. I
And
mean,
he,
really just
and he could probably, for example, describe everything about the life of Vincent van Gogh. No.
yeah, I mean, he knew what was going on in history at that time. He knew what was going on in the artist's mind as he was painting, or what was said, as the artist was painting that work. Um, and so it started me thinking, and I got involved with a couple of other individuals when I got back stateside, and they, had an interest or had someone in their family that was on the spectrum, a high functioning autistic individual, and we started to talk about, how these people might fit into the technology areas. And so I started working with a human resources person at Warner Brothers who had the same passion towards this, or want and desire to get something started. And we put together a small program, and really learned quickly that it wasn't supporting the high functioning autistic individuals in the areas of technology. It was more about giving them support in the social aspects, you
Yeah.
know, bus schedules, or how do they get to work, or, dress for work, whatever. And so a combination of providing them a technology opportunity with the social support of social coaches and things like that, we launched a small program. And then it became to the point where it worked at, Warner's, and we wanted to try it again, and start to see if we could expand this out. So I started working with an individual named Rebecca Beam, and she actually now has ended up starting a consulting company that is deals in only high functioning autistic individuals, and really has taken the whole social aspect, coaching aspect to the next level. And it's grown into, a several hundred persons that are now employed. And what we found through trial and error, um, is that the specific areas where we found, of course, coding, security analysis, testing, training, pattern matching were all things where not only could the high functioning neurodiverse individual perform as well as, but most certainly most times performed and exceeded a neurotypical individual.
Sure, because of the ability to concentrate on focus on a specific area.
Yeah, and so, and then as you got a couple of these people engaged at the studio and working, um, they formed social groups, and the sort of the strangest thing I think is that we actually had people that were already working at the studio then identify as high functioning autistic, who had the diagnosis, and to be part of that like social group that formed. But now, through the company that I'm still, uh, work with Rebecca on, and talk to her often about. She has taken this to the next level, and not only across media and entertainment, but across all industries, and really now are providing meaningful jobs that actually give someone a lot of self confidence, and feel like they are giving back and feel like they're contributing Whereas in prior to this, I think a lot of the state and federal programs were just sort of keeping them in a program
Yeah, yes,
and yeah,
exactly.
and weren't allowing them to actually be productive members and contribute into a cause. So, what turned out to be sort of a, we'll figure it and we'll try it for one person, two person, three person, now has turned into a pretty good size
Yeah,
initiative.
and it's one thing that I personally find offensive, the concept of these sheltered workshops. In so many instances, they're not necessary. People can be integrated into the mainstream and exhibit their own talents, correct?
Correct. And they end up, you just have to be aware of, how they integrate
Mm.
and what they're going to be comfortable doing and integrating, from how you set up meetings, how presence in a conference room, workspaces, noise, um, other sensory overloads. If someone has a scent, gets overloaded by certain scents, you have to be aware of those things. Those are the things that we really concentrated on to make sure that the work experience was great for them.
And there are a
Um,
couple of important things here. The employment in this case, we're talking about huge employers, the big film studios. They found out that employing these individuals with diverse talents was cost effective for the studio. In other words, this wasn't charity, it was cost effective for the studios, correct?
yeah, I mean, I think at first when we had, social coaching and those things, it was a cost. And
Right,
studios do, watch the cost. I always say if you ever want to find out who the cheapest, most frugal people on the world are, go work at a production because they watch every penny because they want to make sure every penny's put into the film.
right.
So they watch all the costs. So there was, I think a burden at first, but then spread across more and more individuals, it became well worth the investment and self-sustained itself across, this program.
And I think also a key concept that a lot of people don't necessarily understand at first is that, am I correct? These neurodiverse, if you will, individuals um, may have different skills and talents. Perhaps their thinking pattern might be a little different, but not to think of that it's sick or abnormal. They fit right in, but with their own talents, with their own patterns, their own cognitive patterns.
Yeah, one of the individuals that I had that was on the spectrum, he did I stole this from him, so this wasn't my original thought, but he's like, "We're not wired bad, we're just wired different."
Exactly.
And I think that's, really sunk in and really stuck with me as I mentioned pattern matching. When looking at, like, security, if you're having and looking at logs to see if you have had any kind of intrusion, quality assurance, looking for code abnormalities or even coding, all that's skills that are actually probably better honed and better within a neurodiverse individual than a neurotypical individual.
I see. Well, I know for one thing, Dustin Hoffman would be very proud of you. Of course, I'm kidding. I'm alluding to the character in Rain Man, uh, but the point here is that neurodiverse individuals can be incorporated in the mainstream and productive for themselves and everyone. And you're a perfect example in working within such a large venue, Warner Brothers, 20th Century Fox. And as you said, it actually, through your advocacy efforts and the efforts of others, it actually spread throughout many industries.
Yeah, and it's actually gone worldwide now. Before I left Warner's, or actually right after I left Warner's, I started working with a group based out of London, um, who is taking this to the next level across the film industry, across the world. A lot of production happens now in Holland, Belgium, London, India, and Singapore, and Japan. And programs now that are in place in all of those countries through this worldwide sort of initiative, to bring light to this and to engage these folks into meaningful technology careers.
And another concept, which I think is very important, did these advances in how, excuse me, how you sensed it, um, change the way people thought, move them away from the concept of disability to people's abilities?
Yeah, again, and I think realizing the capabilities and the abilities, but also again going back to managing the what's going to be a problem. I'll give you an example. Is one thing that is always present in any technology project. There's a lot of stress. There's a deadline, and you have to have code at a certain point. It has to enter testing at a certain point, and I think that again, from abilities to create code better than anybody, but also knowing how to deal with an individual to take criticism on hey, this code wasn't exactly right, that at the end of the day it doesn't do what it was supposed to do exactly, and it needs to be tweaked. And so it was really more training the neurotypical staff on what we needed to do in order to make the neurodiverse individuals successful. So, but again, abilities and capabilities of the neurodiverse community, it's eye opening once you start working with it, and really understanding what those capabilities are.
Exactly. So, again, I wanted to have Tom on our show because not only um, does his obvious skills in being the head of information technology for two studios, but I wanted to bring Tom to the forefront uh, to basically highlight his behind the scenes efforts with neurodiverse individuals to create a more inclusive workforce, a more inclusive milieu for everyone. And I know you're very modest, Tom, because there's so many people with lesser jobs who I would say tend to be tend to use the bravado and the braggadocio and um, the narcissistic attitude. And I will tell, Tom, you may not say this, but I'll tell our audience, you're not like that. And when you consider everything that you've done, albeit in partnership with others, I think a person like you and what you've done should be promoted.
Well, I think promoted is great, because the thing that I found is that having these conversations, you find other people that are just as passionate about this than I am. So every time I have one of these conversations, someone pops up and says, "Wow, I'd love to do this," and then I hook them into the network of folks that I know,
Right.
and these consulting firms that have popped up, they're not only experts at providing technology individuals, individuals to do certain tasks. They're experts in every state and federal program, incentive, and regulation around workforce or for a neurodiverse group. So, it's understanding, what regulations, what programs, what incentives you have in your state or county or federally, and finding people that have this passion and getting them hooked into this network. That's really sort of the joy I get out of it now that I'm not right on the front lines, but networking people that have this same passion. And it might be because they have a child at home that's on the spectrum. It might be, they have a relative, or it just might be something that just catches a spot in their heart, and that they want to pursue it. And getting like-minded individuals together to talk and to move projects forward is really sort of my passion now.
And a passion, besides philately, besides stamp collecting, a passion that is extremely productive for everybody.
Yeah.
I did want to mention that I had a classmate who is an expert in uh, I would say in dealing with individuals within the autism spectrum, lives in Pennsylvania, but a brilliant man, and he will, um, hopefully he'll get to see the show, but he would appreciate, everything that was done. He would understand the aspect of social supports, for example, the need for social supports, but in the long run, the productivity that comes out of this, and outside of having these individuals, literally sheltered, and which, in my opinion, is not in anyone's best interest.
No, I mean, I'll give you an example. This was not actually in my group, but working with the team from the UK, they actually got involved with an individual who was on the spectrum, and he had a double doctorate in computer science and astrophysics,
Yeah,
and he was living on the streets in London. Okay, and they employed him, and again, they, helped him fit into the work environment, and it was strange during large meetings. In technology, you have a meeting every morning called a stand up. And
right.
that's when you review the day's work of what we call the sprint to get something done. And you review that work and you talk about what you need to do in today's work in order to deliver something. Sometimes they happen every day or every other day. And during this group sprint, this individual really couldn't be in the same room with the other individuals. He sat in sort of an annex room, and he sort of Indian style up on a credenza, and typically wouldn't participate at first. But then within 5 or 10 minutes, you'd hear a voice come out of that annex, and he would start to participate. And finally, then he would come in the room, and during the stand up. So I think those are the kind of stories that we have to get around and evangelize. And you know, uh, he is now a very productive member of this team, and that's fantastic. I mean, that's what it's all about. That makes you
Yeah.
feel wonderful at the end of the day.
Exactly. And so I thank you so much for coming on the show and revealing both aspects of your career. And now, of course, you're putting your more literal stamp on other things.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Okay. Right now, I just want to divert ourselves a little bit. I mentioned that friends of the show offered prizes. We're not going to give out any, well, we might give out some prizes to Janet and Dave, who are in our audience. But our friends offering prizes, of course, Maestro Ariel Rudiakov and co-director Joanna Geneva Rudiakov of Taconic Music. Remember that it's Taconic music year round, including their chamber music concerts in the summer. I also want to mention our friends at the Dorset Players, including Paul Michael Brinker and Elizabeth Hazelton, the co-producers. I want to remind people, this is very important to really our community, that the Dorset Players is offering a very special benefit concert of Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake by the Grand Kiev Ballet on March 6th at 7:30 p.m. Why am I mentioning this? Because proceeds will go to the children of the Ukraine who have been displaced and otherwise affected by the ongoing conflict. The event features a benefit auction as well as refreshments beginning at 6:30 p.m. So everyone is indebted to Lisa Hadlock of Dorset for arranging this amazing event. So it is a benefit for the children of the Ukraine, and I must bring that out in the forefront, as Joe Franklin would have said, although most of the time he never showed up. But I'll be there, you know. Um, so um, I did want to. I did want to also ask Tom if you have, because we have a couple of more minutes, if you have any more highlights or anecdotes that you will think will be interesting to audience, perhaps maybe to tie together your amazing background within the film industry at the studios, but also your work with the neurodiverse community.
Well, I mean, at the studios, I'll give you one anecdote, and it was sort of an embarrassing one. So, but we'll talk about it a little bit. And that's in at the studios, like I said, there was no divide between creative and distribution executives and technologists at the studio. You know, everybody was included in everything back in the day. And one day, we got a invitation to go to a screening, and it was for the very famous film director and personality who starred in some movies like Shampoo and other things, Warren Beatty, and he was in the screening. And my whole team got invited, and you know, some of my team individuals, including one person that was on the spectrum, was in the screening. And after the movie screened, blurted out that that was the worst movie they ever saw. Uh, because um, the way that their high functioning autism, one of the characteristics is they could never, they would always tell the truth,
Right.
always say what was on their mind. And it involved then a later conversation with Warren Beatty to explain the situation, and he got quite a kick out of it, actually, believe it or not. But yeah,
Interesting.
that was one other anecdote that sort of brought the two together. And I used to enjoy going to the, um, especially working with like some of the consulting agencies like Zavicon, going to some of their events because it's amazing to see the, you know, like movie nights and things like that with these groups of individuals that form these sort of social groups within one another, and they sort of actually become each other's support mechanism. um, and you know, they close bonds, and they have a lot of fun, you know, and they really do get together and find like-minded folks that you know have similar interests, and really take it to the next level.
And Warren Beatty is very much still with us.
Yeah, yeah. You know, but it was that was a moment, you know.
Well, I can relate because I've to some extent my college training was along these lines. Um, People sometimes along the neurodiverse or autism spectrum, in some cases, it's people who have strokes that have affected part of their cognition, but not all of it. So when they are watching, for example, politicians speak, um, the average person will not get the, let's say, hypocrisy or phoniness. And these people, because of their focus in certain areas, will start laughing hysterically. And when you communicate with them afterwards, you realize that what they're laughing about is not necessarily what the politicians are saying, but how their gestures, how their body language contradicts what they're saying. And so they have that cognitive ability, that form of intelligence to discern the hypocrisy, and it holds true in some aspects of neurodiversity, correct?
Yeah, that is true, and you know, again, telling the truth or giving very brutal feedback, especially, you know, with some of the individuals I worked with were reviewing neurotypical coders, and their critiques were sometimes we had to work on softening their uh, their critique of these individuals.
Well,
So
everyone does have to fit into reality eventually.
at
That's
some
true.
point,
Um, Now, I do want to thank our amazing staff and crew. I want to thank our director, Kate Levine, and Amber Roberts, the community engagement and media education manager, frankly, without whose encouragement this program couldn't have been possible. So, this was the first time we did a remote feed. To the best of my determination, has come out pretty well. And we might very well do it again because I have friends and connections all over the country. Actually, more than may go further than around the country. So I want to thank our guests in the audience, um, and I want to heartily thank Tom Roach. Oh, I do want to mention one thing before we leave, because people might be confused. You are not related to Hal Roach and the Hal Roach Studios. Hal Roach was Swiss, and Hal Roach, the Little Rascals, and so forth. He did all those shorts in the early days of the talkies. So you are from a different Roach family, correct?
yeah, not the same, unfortunately, and not the same with Jay Roach, who is the current producer of a lot of the modern films. So no relation.
I see. Well, it's a somewhat common between Irish and Swiss and Scottish. It somewhat common name. So, as always, I want to remind our audience to please send comments to Green Mountain Challenge. You can do it via email. Kate will probably post the address of GNAT-TV on your screen. Please feel free to send comments. We always want to improve the show. We can, within reason, we'll improve it any way we can. Um, Tom, I do want to, as a famous um, newscaster once said, because he did both television and radio, he said, "I'll see you on the radio." And so I will see you elsewhere. Maybe we'll do the show again or
That'd
similar.
be great. Sam, you do a great job. I really appreciate you having me on.
Oh, and I appreciate you're forming a relationship with our old friend, the rabbi and stand-up comedian Bob Alper. I understand you're going to be at his performance, Long Beach, next month, Long Beach, California.
Yeah. Yep,
You
I
and
hope to.
your
Yeah.
nephew, who's a stand-up comedian.
Yep. I hope to have them there. I'm working on it.
Oh, great. Okay. So now, as Gary Moore said many times, I'm not going to do the Carol Burnett outro. Though, as Gary Moore said many times, be kind to each other, will you? And goodbye out there.
Bye bye.